think every single person on this planet needs to be educated and re-educated about climate change. We are dedicated as the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change to embrace this education issue.
We can look into the eyes of our children, our grandchildren, and we can finally tell them that we have joined hands to bequeath a more habitable world.
L'accord de Paris pour le climat est accepté.
State Congress voted to ban abortion. Alternate universe located.
Global temperatures rise.
The effects on social media on Generation Z.
To avoid catastrophe, rising sea levels, and dying coral reefs, the epicenter of a global pandemic.
No exception for rape or incest.
Bom dia, and welcome once again to the COP30 studio here at in Belém. Sorry. We are delighted to have you with us again this day, and we're in the diplomatic zone of the climate meeting. So, Nick.
Yeah, this is our fourth day of broadcasting live here from Belém. It's been fascinating. It's also been fascinating as an operation, as a TV crew, also for the TV stations around as well, like CNN next door. Maybe what the people can't hear in the background is there is an air conditioning unit behind us, which now I'm convinced I know where the engines went when they dismantled Concorde. I think they're actually here firing 80 decibels into our studio. So it's quite challenging, but we know that the people are working very hard here on the climate deal that will come next week sometime.
Indeed. And also the heat is sort of picking up, not just the heat in the studios and the venues here, the pavilions, but also the heat in the negotiations. So, Nick, what can you tell us about what's been happening so far?
So it's very interesting. The issue of oil and gas, the issue of the phase out of oil and gas continues to be a very important part of the discussions here, and quite rightly too. I mean, oil countries like Nigeria and Colombia are both hosting Beyond Oil events today, Beyond Oil events hosted by the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance. So far, Brazil, the UK, Germany, France, Denmark, Colombia, and Kenya have signaled support for a roadmap on how to phase out fossil fuels, which all countries agreed on in COP28 in Dubai. And certainly at this COP30, the Brazilian government has been signaling loud and clear that phasing down and out fossil fuels is all hot air without national roadmaps on how to do it. So I think people need to be aware of this. This is the discussion. Will there be an agreement that there need to be national roadmaps for phasing out fossil fuels at the end of this 2 weeks here in Belém?
That's indeed very positive news you're bringing up here, Nick. So, and also another good thing that's happening here at our studio and also in general is the Science Pavilion. The Planetary Science Pavilion is here for the first time, mandated by the COP presidency, and we are indeed working with the team at the pavilion. And we have the scientists here in our studio regularly, and also we of course push for our Make Science Great Again campaign here at COP. So if you'd like to help us with our mission to strengthen the scientific community and to protect them, and also to amplify their message, of course, you can go just scan the QR code and you will end up on our webpage where you could support the campaign in various ways. And you can also join the Bucket Challenge. This is a really cool challenge, and we're going to see a film about it, and that will let you know what it's all about. So let the film roll.
Hello. How's it going? Hello. How are you guys? Welcome. Have a great day.
Hola everybody from COP30 Amazonia.
Science is the overall view that we need to share in order to take the best decisions home.
I think science is important because it's one form of truth.
Today, as we stand in the world's largest rainforest, Amazonia in Belém, it is predicted by 2100 all the rainforests will be gone. Science is the key to solve this dispute.
I want to pass this off to Zoran Mamdani, the mayor-elect of New York City.
I pass the cup to the finest negotiators at the COP30.
I think we all, not just me, need to pass the cap to Mother Nature. ¿A quién le podemos dar el gorro?
We also need a change in values to be able to do what the science is showing us that we have to do. What is a good life? What is happiness? What is it to be rich?
Science is important because decision making has to be based on data.
The best method that we have so far to make the best decisions.
Science is important because it helps us to develop new technologies, solve problems.
If I can find a leader who is brave enough to wear the cap, I'm happy to give it to that person.
We also saw there as well the fascinating Laudatio Si session with a 40-meter-long blue ribbon, which was brought through the corridors to our studio by some really lovely people. Okay, it's now my pleasure to welcome on stage Ingmar Rentzhog, the CEO and founder of We Don't Have Time. Ingmar, we talk a lot about biodiversity and conservation in these sessions. Which seems like a good fit since we're in the Amazon, one of the biodiversity hotspots of the world. Is there any news from COP30 in this matter with biodiversity?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's easy to understand both why we need nature and what we need to do when you're actually in the middle of the rainforest. I hope that one day we will have a COP in the Arctic as well to see the ice melting. But I think both of this is very welcome, actually, even if it was quite a hassle to travel here. Mm-hmm. I would like to just give us some initial slides to talk about setting the stage a little bit. This graph is something I've shown previous days. It's really showing the kind of schizophrenic leadership for Brazil. The deforestation, I mean, we need the forest for biodiversity. Here we actually see the curves going in the right direction, but it's happening on the same time we see oil going in the wrong direction. And this is not only happening here in Brazil, it's happening in many places. I mean, most oil countries, they want to expand their oil to make more money. And they're not against the environment, but they don't want to end oil. They just want to they want to have the cake and eat it. But if we focus on the deforestation, I mean, this is great progress for Brazil. We should acknowledge that, but it's also way too little, because if we look at the broader macro picture, we actually see that Brazil is the worst country on the planet regarding how their forests are decreasing. Some countries like China are actually growing the forest. That's really good. You also see Russia there. But Brazil is really a bad example here. So just making we can't just decrease the deforestation. We need it to stop, and we need it to become nature positive and start growing again. And I have a last graph I want to share. And that's actually a hopeful graph in one way. It's happening a lot of things in nature policy, where we now see a decrease of emission from land use. So we're actually moving in the right direction, but the overall emission is growing. We're actually increasing emission this year with plus 1%. It's a new study. If we would just have been flat with oil, we would have seen a decrease of emission because of what we do in nature. No one of those curves are doing enough, but we really need them to start going down at least. So that's my main message here. We need to get off oil.
Come on. I mean, but there is some possibility, right, that this could end as a very important year, certainly in respect to China, in terms of its emissions starting to not only flatline, but also maybe starting to head down. So we have to wait to the end of the year, right? So it is a bit of a mixed picture. You're absolutely right. We have to get off oil and gas. But yeah, there are some good signs as well, Ingmar.
There's, I mean, as you saw there, the emission from land use are going down. If you mention China, for example, they are growing the forest, and they are actually decreasing their overall emissions. So there's good signs, there's bad signs, but this is a COP of the truth, and I think it's important to talk about the truth.
Yeah.
And yesterday we had the pleasure.
I was going to come to that. Yeah. Yesterday you did an interview with Andreas Eriksson, the Climate and Environment Minister of Norway, and then in the evening you were at dinner with the Colombia Minister of the Environment and Sustainable Development, Lina Estrada.
Yeah.
So what is the difference between the policies of these two oil countries, Norway and Colombia?
It's a big difference. One difference, Colombia is not a super rich country. They don't have enough, they don't have that surplus of money. Norway, on the other hand, they have so much money. And they are acting very differently. Norway, they reasoning that, I mean, they want to, I mean, I talked to the climate minister, he's sincere, he wants to, you know, that we are going to handle the climate crisis, but he believes that it's just to capture the carbon when we burn the oil and everything is solved. And we don't really see that tech scaling. It's a tech that will be great if it's actually applied, but we don't really see it in the world. I hope he will prove me wrong, that Norway will be the first country that will capture more carbon when they are selling oil, but I'm quite skeptic there. But it's interesting to hear their arguments, actually. But if you, the same day I talked to the Colombian minister, and she's very clear. They just put in law no more oil extraction in Amazon. They will host a fossil fuel phase-out summit in April next year. They've actually invited Norway. The Norway minister said he's planning to come, and thinking of it at least. And I hope that conference will take the discussion we have here and move it forward with the countries that have oil that really needs to have a plan to phase it out. Because, of course, it's very hard for one oil country to do it alone. We need to have an OPEC for fossil fuel phase-out, not for a higher oil price.
And do you think Norway thinks a little bit like Saudi Arabia, that they can be like, you know, hold on for a long time because they might be a low-cost producer? Is that the thinking?
I will say that there's a lot of similarities between Saudi Arabia and Norway when it comes to climate policy. Both are doing a lot of things in the green tech sector. Saudi Arabia is investing most in green tech of all countries on this planet. Norway is doing fantastic in electric vehicle and all that. They're also paying a lot of money to fight deforestation in Amazon, etc. But both are not, I don't agree with both of those countries because they think we have time. They think we have time to extract the last barrel of oil, and we can change when the oil has run out. They know they need to change then, but that's too late. And the same thing with the argument for carbon capture. Yes, we need carbon capture, but we need to fix that first before we are drilling more oil. We can't drill more oil and wait for a magic technology to scale that is not scalable yet. But with that said, I believe that we need to fix carbon removal, but we need to do it first. And when we have that tech scalable, affordable, I'm all for drilling so much oil, but I don't think it will be profitable to pay for drilling oil and pay for capturing it. And we have the energy from sun. We don't need to dig in died dinosaurs that captured the sunlight millions of years ago, when we have the future technology to capture the sunlight today and store it with energy storage that are scaling so much faster than those magic carbon removal technology.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you, Ingmar. Let's move on.
Thank you.
So, look to the next phase of our show here. Let's talk a little bit first. Climate change doesn't just heat up the planet, yeah? It doesn't just change the patterns or fuel extreme weather events or harm the economy. It all threatens and destroys biodiversity upon which we all depend. Just think about food. Think about food on your table every day. The plants, animals, and organisms that make up global biodiversity are important everywhere, but in more handful of countries, biodiversity is unbelievably rich. Brazil, the host COP30, being, of course, one of those nations, a mega biodiverse spot. If we are to hand over a healthy, functioning planet to the next generations, we need to step up conservation efforts while working with rather than against nature. By doing this, we perhaps have our best ally against climate change now and over the decades and centuries to come. Indeed, the architects of the Paris Climate Agreement made it clear that hitting net zero by 2050 needed far-reaching policies, actions and technologies, but without conserving and restoring nature, collective efforts would fall short of the 2050 net zero target. We are calling this part of today's science briefing from conserving seeds to regen agriculture, climate and nature. And first we'll hear about the achievements so far of the Millennium Seed Bank partnership, the longest conservation effort of its kind in the world that has just celebrated its 25th anniversary. And we are delighted to welcome with us Professor Alexandre Antonelli, Executive Director of Science at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew in the UK. We're going to welcome him to the stage. He's with us already. You can see that, so that's already happened. Can I say Professor Antonelli? Do I say Alexandra or do I say Alex?
Call me Alex, that's perfect.
Great, Alex. Before we have a chat, I'm going to see a very short video starring the actress Kate Blanchett, an ambassador for the Royal Botanic Gardens, about the seed bank. Can we just roll that film, please, of Kate Blanchett?
The building that you can see behind me is the most biodiverse place on our planet. It's Kew's Millennium Seed Bank, the largest wild seed bank in the world, and it's a hidden gem tucked away in the heart of the British countryside here in Sussex. I'm Kate Blanchett, and I am Wakehurst's ambassador, and I would love for you to join me as I explore the seed bank's vital mission in a brand new podcast, Unearthed: The Need for Seeds. I'll be meeting scientists, experts and researchers from across the globe to discover how their work with seeds is securing the future of our planet. Unearthed: The Need for Seeds will delve into the origins of this remarkable bank and discover how it's already helping to protect the seeds of the crops that feed our world. I'll get my hands dirty alongside Wakehurst scientists as we collect seeds to be stored in the Millennium Seed Bank. And looking to the future, we will explore pioneering new ways of bringing seeds to life and the way in which scientists are working hand in hand with our partners from across the globe. So find and follow Unearthed: The Need for Seeds wherever you get your podcasts. Don't miss an episode.
It's amazing, Alice. And like Kate Blanchett is quite passionate about the Millennium Seed Bank partnership.
Indeed it is, and thanks so much for having me here. It's just a pleasure to be talking to you about this incredible asset that we have forward, but also for us, a big object of pride.
Yeah. So it's interesting because it's a seed bank, it's a collection of seeds, right? And in the 19th century, Europeans went all around the world collecting things and bringing them back to the countries. But this is a very different form of collection, isn't it? What is the purpose of the seed bank and how is it going?
Yes, so since it is a collection of seeds, it's a collection that we've gathered together with partners around the world over the last 20 plus years. And it's not a collection, the world's important collection of wild plants. It now contains about 2.5 billion seeds. Yes, from more than 40,000 different plant species, which is about twice as many species as in the whole of Europe. But it's still 10% of the world's flora. And it's an insurance policy really against, extinction. Some of the species which are trying to save in nature but may no longer exist in the future. We may have them in the seed bank. So that's the original purpose, at least.
So it's 5 years on, and marked its sort of anniversary. What is the future looking like? Is it about collecting more seeds? Is it about research on the seeds that are there? And maybe give me an example of maybe where it's been used to help nature. In other words, to something that's lost, perhaps. But yeah, it's a plan for the next 5 years, Fat.
Sure. It is a really exciting time now because as we're looking back into our accomplishment for this time period, we're also very excited about seeing, what are the best contributions we can make toward in tackling the great challenge of climate change, biodiversity loss, and food security. So, we know those seeds are alive and can be used and generated because we do a lot of tests. It's a very high quality, well-tested protocol. So we basically dry the seeds at 15% humidity. We whip them in those -2 degrees volts. So we know we can bring them back to life and we can utilize them. So what thinking here is exactly that. So how do we utilize those seeds for tackling those challenges? And it is going to be about gathering more seeds, but very strategic. So we're focusing now on easily owned species that are threatened, that have very economic importance or cultural importance, that are narrowly distributed, and main success not only by how many seeds and niches we put into the bank, but how many we utilize. So we have 3 objectives looking forward. The first one continuing to be to prevent plant extinction, and we do know that we have already several species in the seed banks which are probably no longer native in the wild. You can't find them anywhere. The second one being how to use those species to restore ecosystems. And now that we're trying to find climate change, we absolutely have to bring those species back. An example I'd like to give you is that some of you may remember the terrible fires that affected Australia some years ago, the wildfires that swept over big chunks of land, and many species were disappearing because of that, and very hard to find for our Australian colleagues. But we happen to have many of those seeds in our seed banks. So what we did was to send back some of those collections of several different species, which both helped create healthy populations of those species which had been affected by fire, but also to restore some of those affected ecosystems. And you never know, Nick, when you put seeds in the seed bank, when you're going to need them. So it's not something that only happens in the future. We know climate change is here now, and therefore it's really important to have that insurance policy. But the third one is about how to create nature-based solutions to climate change, food security. And here there's some really good opportunities, I think, to look at where are the biggest alternatives, I think, to some of the most common crops that we're consuming today. It's very interesting to notice that we, as humans, eat basically only 3 plants. More than 40% of our calories come from 3 grasses, wheat, rice, and maize. So we're essentially eating just like cows. So we absolutely need to diversify food systems. We know that there are more than 7,000 plant species which are edible and used locally as crops. And therefore, we like to use our seed bank together with our partners in many different countries to provide more climate resilient alternatives to common crops. So those three are the main areas of research and implementation moving forward.
So I suppose there's 2 ways of looking at it. The wild seeds that you collect can be brought back, and also you can increase potentially the biodiversity, say, of agricultural food crops. But also, I presume that scientists are looking at the seeds to look closely at the DNA and the genetics to see, could some of these be adapted scientifically into the future to deal with perhaps new conditions that might be on planet Earth. It's kind of a double thing, maybe, yeah?
Absolutely. And that's also an area where we're trying to understand a bit better how much genetic diversity do we actually have and what should we have in the future. Because it's not only about the amazing diversity that exists out in nature for giving us food and source of fiber or building material, but it's also about the variation that exists within species, which is absolutely crucial, as you say, Nick, to really make sure that those species will survive in the future. So, for instance, if you eat apples of different varieties, that's because there are genetic variations there. And that's the same for any species, really, where some species are going to be much better adapted locally, even though, for the same species, you can get species with seeds which will no longer be viable. And we have seen that in our gardens, for instance. We have now a very vast collection of living trees at Kew Gardens in London, but many of them are threatened by the droughts and increasing temperatures. So we think that we may lose, by the end of the century, a very large proportion of our living treescapes, and therefore it's now the moment to use some of those seeds to trial what are the future urban trees for ourselves, but also for other cities in the UK and elsewhere.
Tell me, you're working at Kew Gardens, you're the chief scientist there, which is a really incredible position. But you're also a professor at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. And you're also Brazilian, which is great because here you are in Belém, on the edge of the Amazon. And you have this project called is it Araca project? How does it fit together?
Well, they're very complementary. So basically at KU you have now more than 600 science staff, about 100 scientists taking together postdocs, PhDs. So it's a big team working in more than 100 countries, all with one ultimate mission, was to understand and protect plants and fungi, to some of those big challenges for humanity, for our planet as well. My position as a professor really allows me to understand what we know in terms of the scientific advances that allow us to speak up and increase the impact of the work we do. And also, I've been somewhat frustrated being a scientist where, I think the limitation to whom I can propose others to follow advice. And I kind of wanted to take some things in my own hands into my home country. And I had seen a child and seen those, rainforests, the eastern part of Brazil, disappear in front of mine. So therefore, this non-profit Brazil Foundation, which is now trying to protect and restore, its own this ecosystem, which there's less than 8% left.
That's the Atlantic rainforest, yeah?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So everyone's about the Amazon. Yeah. The Atlantic forest is the little sister of the Amazon. It's about 1/3 of the size. But it's much more degraded, and it's one of the most biodiverse places, but also one of the most.
Yeah, we were looking at some graphs just here, the deforestation rates in Brazil, and of course they shot up under Bolsonaro, then Lula's helping back the rate of deforestation down again, which is great. But actually we need zero deforestation. It's not just the rate, isn't it? We need to get even further down the road.
Absolutely. So at the same time, it's great to celebrate a decrease in the rate, so the speed of which we could numbers. Of course, we have to stop that because there is already enough land, degraded land, on which we can grow our food, we can build our cities. So there's no excuse to continue deforesting. And you're right, it's still going on. There are only other tropical rainforests around the world, in Congo Basin, South Asia, Indonesia. We saw last year a record of about 6-7 million hectares being lost, which is both due to people cutting down the forest, deforestation, but also the action of fires that most of them human-made, which accelerated by drought and climate change. So it's absolutely unsustainable level of deforestation. We absolutely have to curb.
Okay, let's stay with us here. So we've got two further guests, and I think that's a good link actually between, because a lot of that change in the Amazon is happening as a result of agriculture. And agriculture is absolutely clearly needed. 8 billion people to 10 billion by 2050, but we need to do it in the right way. So these two guests will be coming in seconds. I think we have a bump up. So we're very delighted. I think Alex is very delighted too as well that we've got two further guests with here today. We've got Katie Weintraub. I don't know if I pronounce your name completely mangled, as a British person always does, then please correct me straight away. She's the Brazil lead for She Changes Climate. And joining her, Andre Wongtschowski. Okay, and that sounds a bit Polish.
It is Polish, half German.
Half Polish, German, okay. And he's the executive director of the Instituto Valterra. Okay. Katie, look, let's kick off with you first. Tell us, what is She Changes Climate, and what do you do at Brazil lead for that?
So I'm happy to be here today. So I am the Brazil lead for She Changes Climate. And She Changes Climate is an international organization and movement that promotes women's leadership at all levels of climate action. So whether it's the COP delegates or women in local government or in the business sector or women on the front lines, women farmers, promoting gender equality in all aspects. Essentially, we believe that women aren't just victims of climate change, though they're often more vulnerable to climate change, but not because they're inherently more vulnerable, but because society that we've built makes women more vulnerable. But women are actually some of the most key protagonists and solution holders. If we don't have gender equality, we'll not be able to reach the climate change goals that we're to reach. So we've been doing mapping of nature-based solutions led by women across all the biomes of Brazil. So I've had the pleasure to learn and research and understand what's being done, what's special about women leadership. And on top of that, I just say I also am the head of partnership at Sinaldo Valley, which is a center for ecosystem restoration in the Atlantic rainforest in Rio de Janeiro. I've been there for 10 years, and we are a center where we prototype and pilot nature-based solutions in the Guanabara region. We teach, replicate, and sell them throughout the biome. So I have kind of a mix of these two worlds.
Okay, background there. And it's your work obviously interfacing maybe a little bit with what Alex doing the Cassia.
Araçá.
Oh, there you go. Araçá project. Portuguese hotel. But are you close? Are you neighbors in the operation, or are they somewhere else?
We're not far apart, and we were talking about yesterday, so we have to hit each other's sites.
You've already met. Okay, fine.
Yeah, we met, yeah.
Oh, Andre, so let's come to you. Tell us, what is the Instituto Belterra?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me here. Instituto Belterra is part of group which comprises the institute and the business side. I'll mention briefly about the business side. So Belterra implements agroforest system on degraded areas with commercial approach. So Belterra rents the land from owners that have not been using land or that have a very degraded land they're not able to use any longer, and it transforms that land into a productive system. We call it productive restoration because we actually help them build forests where there was previously degraded land, and this produces many useful things like fruits and seeds and wood, for example. Instituto Belterra works on all those aspects that Belterra Institute cannot work commercially, and there are perhaps two importantly. First one is working with indigenous communities, traditional communities, and very smallholder farmers that have half an hectare up to 5 hectares of land. Belterra cannot operate commercially with them, so Instituto Belterra operates a philanthropic model to transform degraded land where these indigenous communities or smallholders live into productive farms. We also look at the very ecosystem for restoration in Brazil, for productive restoration in Brazil, trying to understand what are the main bottlenecks and how we can create some sort of active action in order to address these bottlenecks and allow the ecosystem to grow as fast as it needs to grow in order to achieve our 12 million hectares goal of restoration by 2030.
So this is in, obviously, Brazil. And are you anywhere near the Atlantic rainforest, or are you somewhere else in Brazil?
Mostly in the Amazon. Perhaps 2/3 of operations are in the Amazon. We also have a large operation in the Atlantic forest, Atlantic forest in Bahia, and a smaller operation in the semi-arid region.
So I see there's a kind of connection here because, I mean, anyways, I think we mentioned it earlier, it is pressure of agriculture that probably is largely defining the changes in nature around the world. Has been for some time, but is maybe accelerating in many cases. But there are alternatives, aren't there? I mean, you're mentioning an alternative. There are alternatives to this, more sustainable forms of agriculture. Talk a little bit about, Alex, how you see that.
Sure, Nick. Interesting. The production agriculture is the #1 driver of biodiversity loss and in the oceans. It produces 1/3 of all greenhouse emissions, and it's also a huge contributor to pollution. So the three prices that the United Nations declared as planetary crisis. So it's a big problem, but we can also see it's a big solution, because if we are to turn it on instead of sustainable, we can also tackle all three elements at the same time. And it is also very good that there are alternatives. Sometimes there are which we don't have an alternative for, but when it comes to it, there are, instead of asking people to eat meat, you can ask them to eat more, for instance, and fungi, and that's really great protein-based source of proteins and the other nutrient-rich food which derive from plants which are sustainable, adapted, and I think there's some really good opportunities there. And of course, it will be great to hear Andres as well.
So I mean, there's two interesting features there. There is agriculture itself, but then there's a meat side of the story as well. If we were a little less, I mean, I haven't eaten since 2012 after being taken to an abattoir in Kenya. cured me of eating meat, so maybe we should always bus trips to abattoirs. People can see what goes on, they might go, oh, I'll just go for a plant-based diet then. Regenerative agriculture has really come forward, isn't it, as an idea. And it used to be in the past there was this polarization, the intense agriculture will be the big companies and the chemical. Then on the other side was the organic side fighting it wars. But somehow people seem to have set a bit more into maybe these complex, polarized worlds can somehow live together a little bit through the lens of regenerative agriculture. Is that correct? You think? Your thoughts here?
Yes, I think we're in the early stages of a transition curve. There are many obstacles still to overcome. Perhaps one of them is that typically regenerative agriculture is more complex to do than traditional agriculture. There's still lots of things we don't know about that and how, and particularly how to do it scale. We have very successful in doing regenerative agriculture in smaller plots, but we're talking about farms that, for example, for soy that are as big as 100,000 hectares. We still have some technical challenges to do that. But perhaps most of all, I think it's a problem of culture. People still believe hard that it is more difficult to do, that it is more risky to do. Farmers tend to be very risk adverse. So I think what we've been trying to do is to demonstrate that it's very possible to do it, that it's profitable to do, so others will come on board and the movement can really take off.
And I can just add to that, I think he's saying about complexity is that our financial system isn't built yet necessarily to seek to that complexity. And when you're transitioning to regenerative agriculture, often takes a few years to be able to reach that point where it is productive, where it's lucrative, but farmers not necessarily are they are reverse and also don't have the financial means to take that risk, because if 2-3 years where it actually have to go down a bit in production or go up, we have a financial system that can actually those loans support that. It doesn't have to be the farmers who are always taking the risk. I mean, the whole society needs to share in that risk. The stakeholder, the businesses, the financial services. I think we have to build an entire system that allows us to make the transition.
Alex,
yeah, if I can add to this, well, I think debate in the scientific community has been about whether to have like big protected areas, so land pairing versus and sharing. And I think some of this is in terms of agriculture, but the scientific evidence is quite overwhelmingly clear that we need a lot of protected areas because many threatened species occur in those areas, and there's an edge effect. You need to have those cohesive areas where species can have populations of species. In the case of Atlantic forest, about 80% of all the trees endemic to the Atlantic forest are with extinct, for instance. But that there's millions of hectares, literally, of the great land upon which we can really grow our food much sustained. And I think it's not about the workforce needed to work agroforest, but it's also about the job opportunities that is generated, and also the learning and working to get to towards climate action and change, which will enable people to have a more sustainable use of land. So I think there's some really opportunities. I think we can bring back some really interesting biodiversity value and also carbon sequestration by working out of forestry. And I think the question is always the scale and how do we do this in a way that's inclusive and is aligned with the objective of the landowner custodians land in those areas as well.
So it's always been with these large-scale challenges that there always were certain organizations whose jobs was to de-risk the kinds of investments that, spark change. I mean, often it's been in the past the World Bank, or some of the multilateral development banks in different regions. But I noticed that you talked about soya, and I was thinking not so much about soya in Brazil, but I know that the Unilever being one of the world's big food companies, as well as other things, their main mayonnaise is called Hellmann's mayonnaise, as you probably know, and it's made out of soya beans. And they get those soybeans from somewhere in the United States. It might be Iowa, or it's one of those states. And they ask the farmers there, look, can you go for regenerative agriculture? Because we need to decarbonize our supply chain. And you're not doing that because you're carrying on with your normal intensive agricultural practices. The farmers said no. And quite rightly, as you know, they're very conservative, because if you lose your crop, you've lost everything. And in developing countries, you might lose your life, right? Because you're starving. So it was Unilever that de-risked the switch from intensive agriculture to regenerative, and now it doesn't give them any money at all, I think, because now they're very happy with it. But it took them 5 or 6 years to get happy with the switch, Can
I respond to that?
Yeah.
I think you're bringing an extremely important point that companies in the private sector have to be part of this story and be pushing that. So a project that we're working at St. Aldo Valley is we're working with a corporation called Abuca, which is a B Corp from Italy, and they're a biopharmaceutical company that needs very high quality plants to be able to produce these very high quality health products. And they have this really high technology that uses kind of like all the molecules. I don't exactly know how it works. And they are partnering with us as we kind of work as the intermediary, where we're working with a group of farmers who are interested in producing food in a different way, in a regenerative way, but they need the market. So we did this partnership. Sinal is the intermediary. Abuca has promised to, or they've actually invested in a pilot of 3 hectares of land, and we're going to grow, we're growing acerola, which is, it's like the Brazilian cherry, and it has a very high vitamin C content. And so we've designed an agroforestry system knowing that if it works in the future, they will buy it and they're paying for it in that investment. And we're also intercropping with cassava and other plants that the farmers can use for food security and sell on a local market. And so this started last year, but the idea is this is 3 hectares. And if this works, the company is willing to scale up because they have this demand, and this whole region could be planting these crops. So I think that's a great example of how it can work and how like the companies it has to come from the companies as well, because the farmer can't take all that risk on itself.
Very good point. I mean, yes, do come in. Yeah.
Yeah, we have an interesting example of that in Belterra as well. So we were pleading for a loan from the National Development Bank, BNDES. It's a large loan, 100 million reais. And what unlocked the loan was an agreement with a large chocolate company that committed to purchase all of the cacao beans that we will produce over the next 15 years. All of it will be purchased in a certain area, will be purchased by this company. So by making this commitment, this offtake commitment, we were able to unlock a very large loan from the National Development Bank. So this combination of public money with private capital or private commitments to purchase your goods, it can be absolutely transformative.
Very interesting.
Just on the question of risk, I think it's absolutely understandable why investors and companies would like to avoid risks, but there's also danger if everyone just moves away from there. And therefore, I think it's very important to understand, map those risks, and then you're able to address them. Because even though, for instance, some countries, including Brazil, have deforestation linked commodities, there are others not doing. So I think, for instance, the work doing at Q is to use the chemical signature of different commodities, including timber and soy, and we can do that for any other commodities like even meat, to understand where does it come from. So basically, based on stable isotopes or trace elements, it's now possible to verify any claims that are made on the sales. So I think that's one strategy of traceability helps us along the supply chain, so that companies can really understand their patterns and then approach that in different ways.
Sorry, can you say that again? So you're using isotopes to trace the agricultural products.
Yes.
What show they've come from a sustainable system.
Exactly. So there's a adaptation in international trade of any commodity, really, from timber to soybean and other products. But now we can verify any claims that are made in paperwork, and we can also know when a scenario which was discovered by forest last year or anything that is being for 10 years.
Okay. Are guys using that at all in some land? Not so far, no?
No, not.
Well, maybe you guys should have that off. That might be quite
Definitely
interesting.
should.
It does go down to governments as well, and kind of regulate that impose the European personal law first, which will come into force. One mechanism which companies will oblige to really know where their products come from.
Yeah. I mean, I know people have been using blockchain to trace traceability as well. There's obviously various mechanisms out there, but it's a very good point you raised there. I'm interested in this land of use. How much land is there in the Amazon that was once trees and then became farms and now has lost its activity?
We're talking about 8 million hectares of traded.
8 million?
80 million.
What proportion of the Amazon is that?
Perhaps 10% of the Amazon.
Right.
So most of it has been deforested over the past 50 years. I would say over 8% of it has been forested over the last 50 years. And typically, the devastation cycle in the Amazon starts with wood collection, then cattle. And cattle is in Amazon really, really low activity. So typically with a cow or even half a cow per hectare, which transforms into miserable financial return. So pretty much anything you substitute that with is 10 times, 15 times, 20 times more profitable than the current situation. So the opportunity, the financial opportunity and the environmental opportunity they have at the moment at the Amazon is really, really massive. And it's interesting because this is the first moment perhaps in history that investors with really large pockets, we're talking about 10, perhaps hundreds of $billions, have a really effective investment opportunity to transform the land in the Amazon into productive forest. So it's a really interesting moment.
What do they get out of it? What are the financial mechanisms that you're tapping into, they're tapping into, that gives an incentive to this? Is it carbon markets or is it something else?
Yeah, so there are two types of reforestation strategies. What we call ecological reforestation, we try to build a forest which was as similar as possible to what was before. And for ecological restoration, it's pretty carbon. That's income. What we do productive reforestation of agroforest systems, and in addition to carbon, have all products that can produce there, cacao, acai, mango, whatever you want, whatever is suitable for that environment, you produce in addition to the incomes of carbon. So the business model is there.
Anybody want to comment on that?
Maybe I can just say that now we are also proposing partnership with Terra and Other in terms of understanding how we could also use the market biodiversity credits, being one of these international biodiversity credits, just trying to propose a high integrity new market where biodiversity credits would means of investment, conservation, creation of name, also agroforest. One of the models where we can only increase the various qualities of peatlands, such as social, also increase the biodiversity in those systems. So we know that have been failure in the carbon market, many different ones. We don't want to rip them, and regulation is going to be really important component. But now, besides all that controversy in some of the failures, there's also the issue that cannot use carbon credits to effectively both restoration only that is not very cheap. So basically, have areas in the Atlantic forest, but others in the world where you just cannot afford bringing back those forests because the carbon credits really wouldn't be enough to enable. So by combining carbon and biodiversity credits together with payment for services, with agroforest commodities, hopefully they are much higher interest for investors. I mean, actually support the restoration of some of those trees, but also the ecosystems on the planet.
I mean, with this issue of carbon credits, you're absolutely right that it's got a whole history of, being dogged by very bad ideas that muddy the water for all the others, right? And I mean, we thought in Glasgow, the UN climate conference there, that whole issue of voluntary markets being solved, and there were all these new initiatives that were going to make sure there was full integrity. That really needs to, take wind right now, because a lot of poorer countries are really asking for investment, and this is one potential for it, right? And yes, at the same time, whether it be Greenpeace or somebody else, always finds a really bad example from the past, brings it out, and a company goes, oh, we can't touch those things, right? We all want to feel comfortable with carbon credits, don't we? And do you think these biodiversity credits can work and will achieve a result?
They can absolutely work, is my personal strong opinion, but they have to be very still regulated, and that's where governments have to show leadership and regulation. That's really the key here, because otherwise will be the white western. And that's the case with carbon credits as well. And I think the disclosure of some of the problems and failures and, of the terrible that happened with the carbon credit funded project really brought a lot of damage to the system. And any really project which, saw their cut because of. So I think we have to be a bit practical, because as there are all cash flows that will bring, from wealthy countries towards poorer ones, then those projects will not happen. And then people have to revert back to deforestation or hunting. So I think it's a real issue.
And I just want to add something about that. As we build up these systems, we have to also be looking at how do we include people who are doing the work, the smallholder farms, the women are doing it. And it's very difficult because for these carbon credits, you have to have really large pieces of land, and it's very expensive to do this. And so coming up with models where you can centralize and do bigger, because many of these land, smallholder lands have small plots of land. So how can you group this in ways they can get the benefits, these biodiverse credits, carbon credits, even if they don't have hundreds of thousands of hectares of land? Because otherwise we're just replicating this model of capitalism and centralization of wealth that kind of led us into the situation.
Yeah, that's a good. I'm doing a series right now on We Don't Have to during the COP on energy efficiency, and you would think, how does this act with biodiversity, right? But just that one project I think we're doing either today or tomorrow is in Germany. They've had a real problem getting heat pumps to houses because the heat are quite expensive, and there's a lot of disinfection around. There's one project I have on the show where they are aggregating streets across cities in Germany, so that you get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of houses, apartments, lining up to heat pumps. Therefore, you're bringing down the price. So it's kind of a collective It's a collective operation to get heat pumps in cities, getting lots of householders together. So it should be the same with agriculture and biodiversity credits, whatever, with small-scale farmers or whatever in Brazil. Sorry, it's a stretch of analogy, but it just strikes as being a bit similar, actually. Collectivization, yeah, whatever it is, whether heat pumps or whether it's sustainable agriculture.
I'm absolutely right, Nick. It's a coalition with the willing. It's about, we have innovated in this space. Action shouldn't be the enemy of good. We need to somewhere. I think what it is saying is of really using like middleman and really ensure that it really benefits the industries. They can work together, and the solution that Ray is talking about, I think they can be transformative. We have to test, we try to support those initiatives, and they make really succeed and scale up.
We're at a very interesting COP here in Brazil. Let's face it. It's very different atmosphere actually to ones I've attended over many, many years. I even covered the first as a journalist with the Times newspaper in London. Angela Merkel was a young environment minister in Germany. Anyway, what happened after that? But I think it's probably quite that they had theirs in Rio and they had the business in Sao Paulo for the COP. So the guys can really focus on what they need to do, right? Which is move the needle times on climate action. But one thing that's also interesting about this COP, there's an effort to deal with disinformation. And of course, it's been rising quite a lot in the last few years. I think perhaps because one big sector economy maybe is a way it might be losing business model, i.e. fossil fuels, and they're now fighting very hard to hold on to that. But do you find there's another big lobby out there, which is the agricultural sector, right? The traditional agricultural industry, very big lobby out there. Do you think that makes your job harder in terms of regenerative agriculture, whatever, when you have a big agricultural lobby out there against maybe change?
Perhaps, and I would say it in a few ways. First, the pot of money needs to be distributed between smallholder farmers and large farmers, and you really need to be really smart about how you distribute that money in order to stimulate the development of regenerative agriculture in Brazil. And typically that will involve money from larger farms that do traditional agriculture, and that might be a bit difficult. But I also think that, at least in Brazil, there is a growing understanding that regenerative agriculture, especially the one combined with reforestation, it's really a smart thing to do, both financially and in terms of environmental impact. So I think there's really a big momentum here in Brazil that is perhaps breaking the bubbles and allowing traditional farmers to really consider moving into this direction, because there's more and more evidence showing that it is possible, it is profitable. Perhaps it's harder over the first initial years, but it might be even more profitable and sustainable for the farms itself. So when we talk about things like water, the weather here in the Amazon and in the center of Brazil has been drier and drier and drier, and farmers feel that in their pocket. Farmers feel that in their pockets. So I feel that there's an initial understanding that is slowly growing into a perhaps larger understanding that this is a necessary transition.
So this is about building resilience. It's not just about mitigating.
Exactly.
I mean, most people keep thinking about that, but we need to be resilient as well, yeah? I mean, if you think about science, you've written many papers, collaborated with many people. Do you ever find it frustrating that sometimes you present these findings to governments and they go, yep, really interesting, and they maybe implement 50% of the findings or 20% of the findings, or...
You're such an optimist. I think it'll be very hard to get anyone to actually read a scientific paper.
Yeah.
And or even read beyond the strap lines, right? Of the news, if you ever get into the news.
Yeah.
So we do have a very problematic gap there between the evidence and what we know about, resilience and about ecosystems and what the challenge we're trying to tackle really, and what needs to be done. So I do interact in my role at the Q and our collaborators very closely with governments. So I also understand from their perspective, the immense number of things they have to deal with at the same time. So I think we need to make it simple, tangible, and lead by example, right? So we have to demonstrate this the problem. This is how someone has tackled that, and therefore we believe this could be expanded or this could be, transferred to another system. So I think there's some really good examples of where, for instance, we have been working with the Brazilian government in terms of accelerating the thinking around bioeconomy transition. So bioeconomy is this idea that, also includes the sustainable use of biodiversity. So basically, how do we keep the forest standing and give more value to biodiversity? And that is about understanding how we can use different compounds and chemicals in species to develop new drugs or new sources of food and micronutrients, for instance. And I think there's a huge potential there. So at Q and our partners in the world, we're describing about 2,000 new species of plant every year. It's just like
2,000 new species of plants every year.
Yeah.
That's absolutely incredible.
And we just
how wonderful.
And, when it comes to fungi, it's even worse or better, or however I want to call it, where we have, less than 10% of all species scientifically described so far. So there's a huge treasure trove. It's a main source of income to many countries in the global south, but we're not tapping onto that. So I think that there's some really good solutions based on biodiversity at the same time as there are tremendous threats. And we are now estimating that about 45% of all plants are threatened with extinction, all the flowering plants we see around us. So it's, on the one hand, a wonderful thing that we are discovering so much and finding new, solutions to our challenge. But on the other hand, it's a race against time.
I love you talking about below ground biodiversity. That's a whole topic on its own, isn't it? What's going on under the ground? Sorry.
Yeah, when we're talking about scientific evidence, there is an important gap in the literature. We did a group did a research of this year about research in agroforestry systems. And there's hundreds of thousands of publications. Everything about which crops are best suited to that environment, how do you manage the soil, how do you manage water. So there's loads of research going on about agroforestry. But they could find very little information about the commercial and the financial aspects of it. So even though we do have loads of evidence about agroforestry system and environmental sense, it is clear we need more research in terms of commercial ability, financial mechanisms in order to do it at scale.
Good. Sorry, I have to wrap up because we've run out of time. This conversation on flowers because really interesting. Katie, thanks so much for being with us. And maybe we should have done a little bit more into what you're doing. But I was really helpful, those examples you gave of the work you're doing with regenerative agriculture. Excellent. Alex, lovely to hear all your work in Sweden, in Brazil. And these are really examples of the work. The idea of somehow bringing dead Amazon land to life is just so fantastic to imagine. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Great to be with you. And okay, thank you all. Let's this session, I'll hand over to our long-standing friends at the Exponential Roadmap Initiative for a very interesting session on women leading on climate. Don't miss it.